celebrating 17 years of Young Turks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to talk about technologies for tomorrow and the future course of collaboration between governments, enterprise, and of course the startup ecosystem. That is what we hope to talk about here this afternoon. We had a great session last year as well, and we hope to build on that momentum today. It's always nice to hear governments talk about being invisible or minimum government, which is what Prime Minister Modi has also promised you. You're talking about invisible governments and more governance. But in the quest for collaboration, when you talk about trying to bring in foreign direct investment, especially when you try and talk about bringing in technology companies into the state, trying to create a culture and nurture a startup ecosystem, give me specifics in terms of what you've been able to do and what more we can see.
As a state, what we have done is democratize data. So, in the Indian context, the state is the largest custodian of data. And just democratizing this data has opened up amazing opportunities for entrepreneurs to come and engage with the state. So we run hackathons every month. These are thematic hackathons, and there are use cases given out. And one of the hackathons that we've done is blockchain. And the use case was land records. And look at it today that we're actually implementing it across the state. So this is where I see that government can actually be a platform for entrepreneurs to come and engage and work with us.
It's interesting that you talked about democratizing of data, because the flip side of that is also challenges and issues with respect to protection and privacy of data. And India is still in the process of trying to put a data privacy and protection law in place. So what have you done at the state level in the quest for democratization of data, but also maintaining privacy and protection?
So we have actually created a core data authority that's the custodian of the data. And then they actually come about with the policies and frameworks on our ability to share data. It could be with the citizen, it could be with other private sector companies. So we've had our challenges. Being the first mover, I think we've been more susceptible to hackings. But then we're actually working, and as a state, we're the only state that actually has a SOC to protect our citizens against this. Mm-hmm. So I think it's an ongoing process. Because as we get smarter, the hackers do get smarter. And it's just it's a journey. That's the way we protected ourselves.
It is a journey. Vishal is the Chief Strategy Officer at HP. What exactly are you looking at in terms of emerging technologies? Also, the criticism of large companies is that they're not often flexible or nimble enough, and hence the need for convergence and collaboration with companies that can provide that skill and those capabilities. How are you looking at this going forward?
Yeah, our challenge in many ways is similar to Andhra Pradesh. We are a $30 billion company, and we would love to keep growing at 15%. But as you know, it's not that easy to grow when you have a large scale, because 30% is you have to add billions of dollars every year. So what we do is we think about, end of the day, we are a product company, right? It's all about innovation and bringing new products to our customers. And we think about our innovation is paramount to our success and our being successful in the market and being relevant to our customers. And we look at innovation in three broad buckets. It's a little bit different than what others do, but that's kind of the model that we have landed on. There's organic development. We spend billions of dollars every year in developing new products. We know that we won't be able to develop everything new, so we go acquire companies, right? And then the third thing, which is kind of interesting model that we have developed, we call it Pathfinder, which is we invest in a set of companies. Actually, a couple of our companies that we recommended are in the Technology Pioneers program at the World Economic Forum over the last couple of years. So there is a set of companies that we invest in. We assemble them into our solutions, take them to our customers, and in many ways we look at them as an M&A pipeline as well. So that's kind of how we think about engaging with the community, the startup community that typically either one, we may not have the idea to go develop a technology which is somewhat outside of our comfort zone. We may not be able to always access the right talent. Right? And so that's kind of the mechanism that we use by which we want to continue staying relevant and continue to innovate in the marketplace.
I just want to spend a little more time talking to you about the third model that you talked about, the Pathfinders, and we saw some interesting presentations early on wonderful stuff that's being done to address some of the real problems and challenges that we face as a global community. But the issue of commercialization and doing it at scale, how, what do you believe needs to be done to build that out, especially when it comes to these companies?
That's exactly right. And that's one of the reasons why companies want to work with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise as well, because we have the large scale. And in many ways, a couple of our companies, both the companies actually that we recommended to the World Economic Forum, are at billion-dollar valuations now. And if you talk to them, you would get a feel of how much benefit they have gotten from being part of the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise portfolio, because we have over 10,000 salespeople who are selling products every day, and any startup would love to get access to that channel. And at the same time, we have 100,000 partners, over 100,000 partners across the globe who are selling products on our behalf. So again, these startup companies look at that scale and say, how can I get access to that? And that's one of the channels, right? And one of the mechanisms by which they try to grow.
Raj, let me ask you now, in terms of the future investments and the current investments that you've already made, what is driving where you decide to put your money today?
So we invest globally, and we've been investing in India for a decade now. And we really started investing in India and investing in fundamental infrastructure. A lot of companies that were doing things that US startups had done successfully and were replicating the model. I think what's gotten exciting about investing in India in particular over the last few years is you're starting to see real new innovation, that there's problems being solved in India that haven't been solved anywhere else.
Give me an example.
So we invested in a packaging marketplace. It's a company that sells boxes to every e-commerce company in India. It's something which in the US everyone takes for granted. You can go buy boxes from lots of big companies, but in India it's not as simple. And as you're building an e-commerce company, you have challenges around payments, around procuring packaging, and around delivery. And we've now invested in all three of those spaces, because we want to help e-commerce companies succeed. Yet we don't want to be involved in e-commerce because it's very competitive. It's a bit of a race to the bottom. And we're excited about what's coming next in India. I think governments like Andhra Pradesh are doing amazing things in data. The next stage is AI. And we were reading this great article early this week saying that India has risen to be the 13th best country in AI. Being 13th in AI is kind of like in sales being second. You're the best loser. And US and China are doing a lot, and India needs to keep going. I mean, we have such incredible talent in India. Governments are opening up data for AI companies to build algorithms, but there's a lot more, and I think India could be one of the top three in artificial intelligence.
Since you talked about AI and you talked about India and its position in the world when it comes to the AI aspiration, from a regulatory perspective, what is it that you would like to see the government, both at the state level as well as the central level in India, do to encourage that?
So we have a big office in Singapore. I think the Singapore government has been a model for some other governments. We're quite close to the government over there. In addition to what I think state governments like Andhra Pradesh have done in terms of opening up data, it's also then leveraging artificial intelligence, being a customer of artificial intelligence technologies, and not just building everything in the government, but being open to leveraging technologies and platforms that are coming from startups. That's fundamentally what's been lacking in some of the startups. There's 200 to 300 startups in India today that are leveraging artificial intelligence. We haven't invested in one yet because we haven't seen yet the ability to translate the algorithm into a productive use case. At the end of the day, you have to solve a customer pain point with that algorithm. Otherwise, it's not really worth much. And I think government can do a lot to be an end user of artificial intelligence.
So how do you kickstart the cycle? They're looking to invest, but the government can't play the role of facilitator. Let me ask you specifically about what you intend to do as the government of Andhra Pradesh.
Hackathons. Because I think that's the best way to get it out there. I think that's the most structured way to engage with the startups. We've done work in water management. The biggest challenge as a state we struggle is lack of water. And we're predominantly an agrarian economy. It's about how do I use this water efficiently. 1 year we had 24% deficit in rainfall, and agri and agri-allied grew by 18%. And the year after that we had 18% deficit in rainfall, but agri and agri-allied grew by 24%. It's about using these algorithms and getting startups to actually come and work with the state. And then this becomes a G2G. So, and in India, with ease of doing business, I think every state is trying to now compete, right? And the whole idea is if they've seen a success story in one state, then the other states are now willing to lap it up. And I think this is just the beginning.
Vishal, let me ask you in terms of what your ask or needs would be from any government, whether it's at the center or at the state level, in order for you to be able to build on what you hope to do.
Sure, let me get to that question. Can I just add on to something
please.
else? I think there was a thread that kind of I captured here, as well as from what I've been listening to over the last couple of days. You asked about data and data privacy, and then you asked about AI. I think the first step is to have data, right? If you don't have data, you can't do any deep learning on it, or you don't have security issues anyways, right? The way at least I think about it is there's risk and reward always, right? And if you always get bogged down with the risk, we'll never get the reward of it. And I think the great thing that at least I saw from the presentation today is that data has been collected, right? And that is the very first step in doing any type of analytics, right? And then you can do AI on that, but you just need a ton of data to do that. So I think this is a great start, right? And I think as the data gets exposed more, you'll see more entrepreneurs build AI tools on top because they have the data now to work off, right? So I think it's a great start, and I think you'll see more of that ecosystem develop because if you didn't have the data, nothing would have happened anyways, right? Sorry, going back to your question now, in terms of what we would like to see, we are actually looking at putting, most people wouldn't know, but India is our largest employee base today. Right? Just think about it. As a global company, we operate in 150 different countries, but we have the most number of employees in India, right? And over time, we have built up, we started with back office like most Western companies did, but over time, we have put our labs there, which is Hewlett-Packard Labs. We have put product development there. So there's a ton of talent that we have tapped into. Now we are looking at putting manufacturing into India. And that's where we are running into a little bit more of a challenge than we did with putting employees in India, right? So as you go to the ask for the country, I think there are a couple of things to be done. I think the country is doing a lot to make manufacturing easier. And I think we, as a company, as an example, we are putting it in. The key there, as it comes to technology companies, everything, it all depends on the ecosystem, right? A company by itself can't go in and say, hey, Hewlett-Packard can't go in and say, I'm going to put a manufacturing plant in. When I can't source memory, I can't source processors.
You preempted my question. How do we ensure that we actually get the supply chain to move as well?
Exactly. So I think that is the chicken and egg problem. But I think that's where the government really needs to step in and say, here are the 2 or 3 industries which are paramount to building out that supply chain, and I'm going to really go after that. And in my opinion, I think from, you're starting to see some dislocations in supply chain given some of the trade issues at play. I think there's an opportunity for India, and I think there's an opportunity for the government of India to be very proactive and go after certain elements of the supply chain and target them proactively to get them to India.
Just to pick up on that point on manufacturing, and this has been the big aspiration. We've aspired to move the share of manufacturing to GDP from 16% to 25%. Hopefully we'll get there in the next few years. But as a state, what can you do to make use of the opportunity that the current trade tensions between the US and China, for instance, threw up?
Well, Andhra is leading the way in terms of attracting investments. If you look at the top 3 FDI investments in Indian history, 2 are into the state of Andhra Pradesh. One is Asian Paper and the other one is Kia. They're the 2 largest FDI investments in Indian history. So I think it's a very valid point here that we need to create the ecosystem. We already have Foxconn in the state of Andhra Pradesh employing 18,000 women. It's kind of fascinating. I mean, 18,000 women working across 3 shifts. But the point is, I went to Foxconn and I spoke to Xiaomi and I said, now give me a supplier list. Because it takes 200 suppliers to actually make a mobile phone. Including the plastic, the boxing and the whole 9 yards, including the, the manual and so on and so forth. So I'm actually going and headhunting each and every one of the suppliers to bring the entire ecosystem. And that's the only way it's not about sustaining, but you have to thrive. And the challenges that we have seen as a country is we attract one big investment, then we forget about it. In the case of our state, no. We got Kia in, I said, great, let's work with all the ancillaries. And let's go to the last mile. And that's when I think we can create a vibrant manufacturing ecosystem.
Exactly.
Raj, you talked about betting on sectors where we are going to see disruption, where we also need to sort of bring in more organized sort of structures in place. Logistics is a classic example, and a large part of the infrastructure story in India, waiting to see that kind of aggregation. But outside of that, because one of the big aims of the use of technology, especially in emerging markets like India, is financial inclusion. And that's something that you're betting on as well. Give me a sense sense of what you've been able to do and what more you would like to do in the space of financial inclusion?
You know, we're just about to make our second fintech investment in the past year in India. The first one we made is in a payments company that appears like a payments company. It's really a data company that's using payments as a way to gather data. They enable 400,000 small merchants across the country today to accept mobile payments, use that data then to give them small loans, access to capital, things that they can't get access to from the traditional banking sector. The second investment we're doing is in a peer-to-peer lending company that's based out of the US, but doing quite a bit of their operations in India. They're providing small commercial loans to small businesses. India has a really vibrant, non-banking financial sector, and we think it's one of the most interesting areas for us to invest. That's largely an area that in the US we're not focusing on, because in the US there is big banks, and we don't see that opportunity. And then even in the underbanked in the US, you see companies like Square and Stripe and others have already built a market leadership position. India is very different. It's a wide open field, and especially for small merchants and small businesses, we think it's a place that there's a host of financial services that we want to provide. I know it's not exactly the consumer side, but we think enabling small merchants actually enables consumers to be able to transact, to lend, and to be much more part of the formal economy.
Absolutely, and increase efficiency as well. Let me end then by asking all three of you, as we have this aspiration of being a couple of $1 trillion economy as far as the digital side is concerned, and we are going to be one of the most we already are one of the fastest growing consumption markets around the world. What do you believe will be the drivers of growth, especially from a digital economy point of view? Raj, I'll start by asking you. And what should be the priorities?
I really think the drivers are things we've talked about today. It's data, it's artificial intelligence. I think it's the collaboration between government, corporations, and entrepreneurs. That's what we built our investment fund on, that the innovation model is changing. Over the last 20 years, it's been the story of one word, disruption. We think the next 10 to 20 years is a story about transformation and collaboration. And I think India has a unique opportunity to define the innovation model differently from the way we've defined it in Silicon Valley.
Well, we hope that we do see this new model evolve. Vishal?
So yeah, I'm a product of University of Chicago, right? So it's all about capitalism. And the way I think about this is there are two or three things that
which needs to evolve also.
That, over time, yeah. The way I look at it...
It is about time that it does.
No, it's not. I think it's still very valid right now. But that's a longer conversation. We can take it over drinks at some other time. The way I think about success stories are there are two or three things that need to come together. There's talent, right? There's capital. And there is support from the government. I'm not calling it regulation. I'm calling it support from the government, right? And those three factors, if they come together, they really spur innovation and then spur growth. And I think that's coming together. I mean, if you just take the example of Silicon Valley, right? Why was it successful? The U.S. government spent a lot of money through universities on R&D. There's a ton of talent, right? And capital came there, right? And it all came together. So I think those are the factors that will help the economy grow. And I think we're already starting to see various pockets of that come together, right? I mean, I think what the minister talked about in terms of Andhra Pradesh, you see that, that was true in the state of Karnataka in the past. You see that in Maharashtra. You see that in other states. So I think it's all coming together. And it's just a matter of making sure that, the policies don't change, that kind of goes back in time, right? And kind of takes us back in time, right? So I think we are on the right trajectory. The country is on the right trajectory. It's just a matter of making sure you continue down that path.
I will give you the final say on this.
I think every industrial revolution has added more jobs, but added it in a different country. And in countries where the governments were proactive and the citizens were ready to embrace. So India has always been a cost arbitrage. But then now I call that we can actually be a skill arbitrage. And as a state, our focus is on skilling up. How do I get my citizens ready for AI, blockchain? I think that's going to play a very, very important role for India to add many more $1 trillion to the economy. And for Andhra Pradesh to be the first $1 trillion economy state. in India.
Well, we wish you the very best of luck with that. Vishal, Raj and Lara Lokesh, thanks very much for joining us here on this panel to talk about what governments, industry and the startup ecosystem can do together to ensure that we actually benefit from the technologies of tomorrow. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.